enterprise that kept her busy, she said, and she told Augustine that she would need to put one of her chewing gum dolls. She'd have to put one of the chewing gum dolls in the Frigidaire for a while before it could go back out and survive in the sun. The yard, like the dolls, had to be nurtured. Thomas McElvey, writing about yard environments, notes that these installations are not only subject to the continual alterations by their makers, but they're also subject to the weather, constantly decomposing and returning to the earth. In their acceptance of organic processes, yards like this manifest a balance between the interventions of culture and the subjects of nature and the cycles of nature. All this, of course, makes the destruction of Rowe's Playhouse after her death all the more tragic. But photographs do capture moments in an enterprise that evolved over decades. They freeze frame Rowe's inventiveness and capture what Xenia Zed has called a deconstructionist's paradise in the yard. Judith Augustine's visit and the notes she took that day also provide a lovely example of what others who knew the artist describe as her generosity and eagerness to have her work seen and appreciated. As I mentioned earlier, Rowe's approach foreshadows the popularity of participatory art projects and public art of recent years, where viewers play a role in facilitating the meaning of an artistic space or event, and the artist is part enchantress and part hostess. Although Nellie Mae Rowe would probably have cared less, she was ahead of her time. It seemed that people regularly brought her things and helped keep her vision going. Despite the fact that there were neighborhood tensions in the early years and the yard was repeatedly trashed by passersby who called her a fortune teller or hoodoo, she remained open to visitors who came to see her playhouse and to photograph it. "I just gained friends," she said. "I like living on the side of the road." I have to say that for someone who wanted to be bothered only by herself, she had a lot of visitors. Over 800 people signed her guest book between May 27th, 1973, and March 15th, 1975. In 1975, Rowe's house was listed in the American Institute of Architects' Guide to Atlanta, and apparently people came to visit in buses. It's worth noting that there are surprisingly few documented yards like this by women, and even fewer large-scale environments. John Beardsley's catalog of visionary sites explains this gender difference partly on the basis of economics. Men, he says, might be more likely to own their spaces or to feel empowered to embellish a rented plot. Additionally, these yards represent a form of public address, so men may feel more entitled to this public voice, a sense of male prerogative, perhaps. Neither of these appear to apply as drawbacks for Nellie Mae Rowe. The house was hers, and she was not a shy woman reluctant to express herself. Oops. This remote has a very delicate touch, so I have to get used to it. Inside 2041 Paces Ferry Road, another changing creation unfolded. After looking at Jay Weiland's photos, I turned to a recent book called The Saturated World: Aesthetic Meaning, Intimate Objects, and Women's Lives. The author, Beverly Gordon, draws from women's history and the study of material culture to examine interiors, collecting, scrapbooking, and doll making, all activities associated with women and previously dismissed as subjects of serious study. But Gordon has also applied this notion of saturation, a world of high sensory intensity and texture, an overflowing world that engages all the senses, to the consideration of vernacular environments and self-taught yard installations. Her idea of the saturated environment is useful in considering Nellie's inside and outside playhouse, a densely embellished woman's space, and an evolving artwork. As living space, studio, and display, Nellie Mae Rowe's creation is multifaceted, but it's cohesive. Like the yard, the interior spaces are alive and in flux. Gordon describes the impulse to compound sensual aesthetic intensity in a highly personalized way as an important creative act. Going beyond the conventional scholarship of art hierarchies, she describes the human impulse to make things special, one that transcends materials, race, class, and is found in both professional and amateur pursuits. When Rowe incorporates elements, recycled and transformed objects, gifts of stuffed animals, family pictures, pictures of her own dolls, as well as the actual dolls, she's crafting a world, her world. There are religious icons, art reproductions, posters and calendars, and images of her personal heroes, like Martin Luther King, alongside her own drawings. You'll notice the poster of the King March on Washington. She's crafting meaning and reflecting her concerns, and I might say building an identity, making a kind of large-scale scrapbook of her life. She actually signs this wall, posting a signature. I'll show it to you in another slide, not these details, but one coming in a minute. Did she think of it as a monumental drawing or installation artwork that says, this is mine, I'm connected to all this? What about the many table installations around the house? Aren't they connected sculptural tableaus, living still life art? Another compelling idea from Gordon's work is the notion of embodiment. She uses the word to characterize the way creators are physically as well as psychically involved in making and remaking their spaces. Embodiment speaks to the creative way that things are touched, moved around, guided by a personal vision, rather than placed based on abstract or strictly informational logic. Nellie Mae Rowe was an artist creating a world, not an interior decorator. Embodiment is most obvious with the dolls. They're everywhere, inside and out. And they include manufactured dolls that float in the upper reaches of the room, as well as Rowe's own hand-sewn dolls seated on chairs and couches. They keep company with her. They're intimate objects, extensions of the body and the self. Just look at this. The children of the photographer Jay Weiland made multiple visits to Nellie's playhouse, and on this day in 1977, everybody gets to hold a doll. Through these photos, viewers also get to participate. We get to play too. It's the nature of this aesthetic to encompass the viewer, to draw us in. Finally, we can't forget that the interior is a workspace, a studio as well as a dynamic display. In this collage shoebox, Rowe has incorporated photographs of her space, along with images of herself working, an act of both recycling and self-representation. Now, one of these has the signature. I don't know if I can find it. Well, trust me, it's there. It's great that you get to see these big, at least I was looking at them with a magnifying glass. She made many drawings, of course, and many of you here are familiar with her drawings. Not surprisingly, images of the playhouse are embedded in drawings related to all of Nellie Mae Rowe's major themes: storytelling, spiritual matters, current events, her life as an artist, and the meaning of death. At Night Things Come to Me, this delightful drawing here shows the playhouse as living space and studio. The artist shows herself in bed. Visions hover overhead. "I see what I draw in my mind at night," she said. "I can see everything like that. I don't care how crazy it is. I'll probably draw it." She saw her process as unique, saying in multiple interviews that she didn't draw like other people. "I can sit right now and look down on the floor. I can see something. It looks like something I could draw, and I'll draw it." This statement sounds amazingly familiar. It's very similar to what the European surrealists in the early 20th century who said. They sought to discover imagery about the unconscious mind by bypassing the censoring mechanisms of logic in order to discover forms that transcended the rational. Juan Miró, who said something almost exactly like Nellie Mae Rowe's statement: "I go to bed at night and dream tomorrow's paintings." André Breton described what he labeled a poetics of the unconscious, beyond the control of reason. Visions induced by trance and dream states were the fuel of surrealist invention, and they passed their prescriptions along to the abstract expressionists like Arshile Gorky and Jackson Pollock. Being true to such a process, however, can yield results that even the artist can't explain. Apparently, Nellie Mae Rowe resisted pinning down the precise meanings of her drawings, and while she loved to talk about herself, it's said that she could become quite testy when pressed for direct explanations. "It is what it is," she would say. Engaging with this work requires that the viewers surrender themselves to her special incongruities and juxtapositions. She manages a very unique tension between the literal and the elusive. This drawing may be a double self-portrait. She shows us the sleeping Nellie, and maybe the artist awake on the other side of the room, perhaps ready to sketch the dream before it disappears. The visions floating above the bed are familiar ones: the dog, the rooster, the birds, the figures, one whole figure and one a hybrid, a mythological kind of creature that appears elsewhere in her work. They're very much the visitations that crop up in dreams in diverse cultures and many storytelling traditions. Playhouse shows the artist at home, drawing what appears to be a tree of life, while outside the garden is filled with activity and low-hanging fruit, has attracted birds, a dog, and a pig. Is this a tree of life or a feeding frenzy about to happen? Rowe's drawings are always about more than one thing. She frequently represents creatures competing for food, which has been interpreted as a warning against social greed and exploitation. The house is a triumph of patterning and decoration. She imports elements of African American quilting designs and symbols. Her signature, something she enjoyed experimenting with, also for decorative effect, is large and extravagantly drawn. Here the artist's house is combined with that of her dealer and friend Judith Alexander. Both homes are colorful and decorated with patterns from quilting. But as always, there's a larger message in the representation of the architecture. Xenia Zed, who knew both Rowe and Alexander and is here tonight, has written that this fusion of the houses amounts to paying the highest visual compliment to Alexander, a woman who would ordinarily be considered an outsider in Rowe's world. It expresses